The cold that night wasn't just in the air, it was in the silence. It was in the way the trees stood perfectly still, like they were holding their breath, like they knew something we didn't. Patton turned toward me in complete silence, his expression colder than anything I had ever seen on a battlefield. The noise around us faded, as if the entire world had stopped, waiting for what he would say next. Then, without raising his voice or showing any emotion, he gave an order so sharp and unexpected that it instantly changed the atmosphere among every soldier present. In that moment, it wasn't just a command. It felt like a turning point in the entire operation, one that would be remembered long after the war had ended. My name is James Walker, Private First Class, 3rd Army, 4th Armored Division. And on December 18th, 1944, somewhere in the frozen mud of Belgium, I watched General George S. Patton look me dead in the eyes and say 5 words that I've never forgotten. Follow the order. No exceptions. I didn't know then that those words would change me forever. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. Small house, big family. My father worked the line at a factory. My mother made the best apple pie in Montgomery County. At least that's what she always said, and none of us were brave enough to disagree with her. We were simple people, honest people, the kind of people who believed that right and wrong were clear lines, not blurry ones. By December 1944, I wasn't skinny anymore. I wasn't certain about much of anything anymore. I had seen friends die. I had seen things I would spend the rest of my life trying to forget. But I still believed, somewhere deep in my chest, that I was one of the good guys, that our side followed rules, that there was a difference between us and them. That belief was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. December 16th. The Germans came out of nowhere. I remember waking up to the sound of artillery, so heavy it felt like the earth itself was screaming. The sky was grey, and the snow was coming down sideways, and somewhere in the distance, the front was collapsing. Word spread fast through the ranks. The Germans had launched a massive offensive through the Ardennes. Panzer divisions, SS troops, everything they had left. But that wasn't the part that scared me most. The part that scared me most was the other rumor, the one that traveled mouth to ear, soldier to soldier, like a virus through the camp. Germans in American uniforms. At first, I didn't believe it. It sounded like the kind of story you tell around a fire to scare green recruits. But then Sergeant Holloway called the squad together, and his face told me it was real. "There's an operation," he said, his voice low and steady, the way it got when he was being serious. "German commandos. They speak perfect English. They're driving our jeeps, wearing our clothes. They've got our dog tags, our helmets, our everything." He paused. "Their mission is to create chaos, turn signs around, cut wires, and maybe, take out Eisenhower himself." Nobody said a word. "General Patton," Holloway continued, "has issued an order. I heard it from Holloway first, then I heard it from Lieutenant Crane, then, 3 days later, I heard it directly from the man himself. General Patton moved through our position like a storm in human form, tall, jaw like a cliff edge, eyes that looked straight through you and out the other side. He wore his famous ivory-handled pistols on his hips, and he walked like every inch of ground he stepped on was personally conquered by him. He didn't give speeches that day. He didn't need to. He stopped in front of a small group of us, maybe 8 men, and he looked at each of our faces, one by one, like he was reading something written there. Then he spoke. "Any soldier caught speaking German behind our lines," he said, his voice quiet but absolutely certain, "is to be shot. I don't care what uniform he wears. I don't care what he claims to be. If he speaks German and he's not locked in a POW cage, he's the enemy. Kill him." He looked at me then, directly at me. "You understand, Walker?" I don't know how he knew my name. I'd never spoken to the man before, but he knew it. "Yes, sir," I said. "Follow the order," he said. "No exceptions." And then he moved on. I want to be honest about something. When I replay that moment in my mind, and I have replayed it thousands of times across the decades, I feel two things simultaneously. Two things that don't fit comfortably together. The first thing I feel is certainty. Patton was right. He wasn't being cruel. He wasn't being reckless. He was being clear. In a war where the enemy was wearing your face, where your own uniform had become a weapon used against you, hesitation was death. If a man at a checkpoint spent 3 extra seconds trying to decide whether the soldier in front of him was real or a German commando, those 3 seconds could end his life and the lives of everyone behind him. Patton understood something that takes years of war to truly understand. Mercy at the wrong moment is not mercy, it is murder, deferred to someone else. The second thing I feel is the weight of it, because orders like that one don't stay clean. They never do. December 20th, 2 days after the order came down, I was stationed at a checkpoint on a road outside a small Belgian village whose name I could never properly pronounce. Me and 3 other men. The snow had stopped, but the cold had gotten worse, the kind of cold that finds its way through every layer of clothing and settles into your bones like it's planning to stay forever. We had been at that checkpoint for 6 hours. In those 6 hours, we had stopped 43 vehicles, checked 43 sets of credentials, asked 43 sets of questions. Who won the 1943 World Series? What's the capital of your home state? What position does the shortstop play? Who's Lou Gehrig? Most men answered fine. A few stumbled, got nervous, had to be held while we confirmed their identities. Nobody liked it. But everybody understood. And then, at 2200 hours, a jeep came down the road. 2 men. American uniforms, American helmets, American everything. The driver stopped when I raised my hand. He rolled down the window. He smiled. He had a good smile. Easy, natural, American. "Evening," he said. "Evening," I said. "Where you headed?" "Rear supply depot," he said. "Got a requisition order right here." He held up a paper. It looked perfect. I looked at the paper. I looked at his face. I asked the questions. "World Series." He answered correctly. "State capital." He answered correctly. "Betty Grable's husband." He answered correctly. Everything checked out, and then the second man in the jeep, the passenger, said something. I don't even think he meant to say it loud enough for me to hear. I think it was reflex, habit, something automatic. He turned to the driver, and in a voice just barely above a whisper, he said 2 words, German words. I didn't understand what he said. I don't speak German, but I knew the sound of it. 3 years of war teach you the sound of things, even when you don't know the meaning. Time stopped. The driver's smile didn't change. That was the thing that confirmed it for me. The smile didn't change. A real American, if his friend had suddenly spoken German in front of an armed checkpoint, would have looked confused, embarrassed, would have said, "Sorry, he's a little strange," would have done something. The driver's smile didn't change because it wasn't a real smile. It was a trained smile. And he had been trained for every variable except the one that just happened. I stepped back. I looked at the man beside me, Private Kowalski, a good soldier from Pittsburgh who had been in the war longer than me. He had heard it too. I could see it in his eyes. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear, not exactly. What I felt was a terrible, awful clarity, the kind of clarity that settles over you when something you knew intellectually suddenly becomes real in front of your face. These men were not Americans. They were Germans. They were wearing my uniform. They were driving our jeep, and if I let them through, they would go somewhere, do something, cut a wire, turn a sign, maybe even reach someone important, and people would die because of it. Patton's words came back to me. Follow the order, no exceptions. I will not describe in detail what happened in the next 30 seconds. Some things belong to war, and to war alone, and they should not be dressed up in vivid language for entertainment. What I will say is this: I followed the order. And when it was over, and the snow around that jeep was no longer entirely white, I stood there for a long moment in the dark and cold of Belgium, and I understood something about myself that I had not understood before. I understood that I was capable of doing the hard thing, not the cruel thing. I want to be clear about the difference, because the difference matters enormously. The hard thing and the cruel thing often look similar from the outside. But from the inside, you know whether you acted from fear or hate or duty. I acted from duty. I acted from the order. I acted because Patton was right, because in a war where the enemy wore your face, mercy without discernment was not mercy at all. But I also understood, standing in that road, that I would carry this moment with me for the rest of my life. Not as a wound, not as a regret, but as a weight. A serious, permanent weight that reminded me every single day that war is not a game, not an adventure, not a story. War is the place where good men are asked to do things that would be unthinkable in any other time or place. And the measure of those men is not whether they flinch. They should flinch, they're human, but whether they hold the line anyway. The next 4 days were the strangest of my life. The paranoia that swept through the American lines during that period was unlike anything I had ever experienced. You couldn't look at another soldier without a flicker of doubt. You couldn't hear a familiar voice without wondering for half a second if it was too familiar, too practiced, too perfect. I watched a brigadier general get detained for 2 hours because he didn't know Mickey Mouse's girlfriend was Minnie Mouse. I watched General Bradley himself get held at gunpoint by a nervous private who was convinced that the capital of Illinois was Chicago, not Springfield. I watched men who had fought together for months suddenly look at each other with new, uncomfortable eyes. The Germans hadn't sent tanks to do this. They hadn't sent bombers. They had sent 150 men in stolen uniforms, and those 150 men had paralyzed the most powerful army on earth. Not with bullets, with doubt. That was the genius of Scorsese plan. And that was why Patton's response, brutal, controversial, legally complicated, was the only response that could work. You don't fight doubt with reassurance. You fight doubt with certainty. You give your men a clear rule, a clear line, and you hold that line without flinching. Some of those men caught speaking German behind our lines probably weren't spies. I knew that then, and I know it now. There were German Americans in our army. There were translators. There were men whose first language happened to be the enemy's language. In a perfect world, every case would be sorted out carefully, evidence weighed, identity confirmed. But the Ardennes in December 1944 was not a perfect world. It was a frozen, terrified, collapsing world where every hour of delay cost lives. And Patton, God bless the impossible man, understood that. Patton's order remained in effect until Christmas Day. I remember Christmas morning with strange clarity. The shelling had been heavy the night before, but by dawn it had quieted to an occasional distant rumble, like thunder from a storm that was moving away. The sky was actually clear for the first time in days, blue and cold and impossibly high. Someone in the unit had found a small spruce tree and set it up against a broken wall. It had no decorations, just a tree, bare-branched, stuck in the frozen ground. But we all looked at it. I don't know what the other men were thinking. I can only tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking about home, about my mother's apple pie, about the way my father used to sit on the front porch on summer evenings and smoke his pipe and talk about nothing in particular, which was the most peaceful sound in the world. I was thinking about the men I had lost, about the men whose names I couldn't always remember anymore, which terrified me, that the war had given me so much to remember that it was crowding out the things that mattered. And I was thinking about Patton's order, and the checkpoint, and the jeep, and the snow. I was not sorry. I want to be clear about that because I think clarity matters when you're talking about things like this. I was not sorry for following the order. I believed then, And I believe now that what I did on that road was right, not comfortable, not easy, not something I would have chosen in any other world, but right. What I felt on Christmas morning was not regret. It was something harder to name, a kind of solemn gratitude, maybe. Gratitude that I had been given clear orders. Gratitude that Patton had been the kind of man who could give those orders without flinching. Gratitude that the line had held. Because the line had held. The German offensive was stalling. The breakthrough to Antwerp was not going to happen. The Battle of the Bulge, for all its horror, for all the blood it cost, was turning. And some part of that turning, some small, hard-to-measure part, belonged to the men at the checkpoints. To the privates in the cold and the dark who asked the right questions and pulled the trigger when the answers were wrong. I was one of those men. Years after the war, when I was back in Dayton with a wife and children and a job at the same factory my father had worked in, I read everything I could find about Patton, about the Battle of the Bulge, about Operation Greif and Otto Skorzeny, and the 72 hours when the American army turned on itself. Patton, I came to understand, was not a simple man. He was a man full of contradictions, brilliant and arrogant, merciful and ruthless, deeply religious and spectacularly profane. He was the kind of man that makes historians argue for decades because he resists easy categorization. But on the question of the order, I think Patton was simply right. Not right the way a law is right, or right the way a theory is right the way a compass is right, pointing clearly toward the truth, regardless of how much everything around it is spinning. He understood that in total war, trust is not a right. It is something that must be earned and verified and re-earned constantly. He understood that the enemy had decided to weaponize that trust, to take the uniform, the most fundamental symbol of belonging, of shared identity, of brotherhood, and turn it into a lie. And he understood that the only response to that was to make the lie too costly to maintain. If you speak German behind our lines, you die. That was the rule. It was brutal. It was imperfect. It caught some innocent men in its edges, but it worked. It gave soldiers a clear, bright line in a world where every other line had been blurred. It cut through the paralysis that Skorzeny had engineered. It let the army function again. Patton never apologized for it. I respected him for that. Apologies, when they come from a place of social pressure rather than genuine moral reconsideration, are worth less than nothing. They are performances. Patton didn't perform. He decided and he owned his decisions. And in my experience, that is the rarest and most valuable quality in any leader. I am an old man now. The war is long over. The men I served with are mostly gone. The Belgium countryside, where I stood in the freezing dark and followed an order that I will never fully be able to explain to people who weren't there. That countryside is green and peaceful now, and tourists drive through it in comfortable cars looking at monuments. But I think about the checkpoint often, more than I think about most things, because the checkpoint is not just a memory, it's a question that never stops being asked. The soldier in front of you looks right, he sounds right, but something is wrong, something small, a word, a hesitation, a smile that doesn't change when it should. What do? I know what I did. I followed the order. Some people, when they hear this story, want me to say I'm not sure it was the right thing. They want a note of uncertainty, a gesture toward moral complexity, because moral complexity is comfortable. It lets everyone off the hook, lets everyone maintain that things are more complicated than they really were. I won't give them that. The order was right, the situation was real. The men in that jeep were not confused civilians. They were trained soldiers operating behind enemy lines in stolen uniforms, violating the laws of war, sent to cause the deaths of the men I served with. What I did on that road was not murder. It was not cruelty. It was the sharp, hard edge of a war that the enemy had chosen to fight that way. I am a man who believes in hope. I believe in the goodness of people. I believe in the possibility of peace. I believed all of those things on December 20th, 1944, and I believe them more deeply now than I did then. But I also believe this: hope is not naivety. Hope does not mean you lower your weapon at the wrong moment. Hope does not mean you trust a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Hope means you fight through the darkness, clearly and honestly, and without self-deception, so that you get to the other side. Patton knew that. It's why he gave the order. It's why I followed it. And if I were standing at that checkpoint again, in that same dark, in that same cold, with that same jeep pulling up in front of me, and those same two words floating in the air between us, I would do it again, every time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for... If you enjoy in-depth explorations of science, history, and the mysteries of our past, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Every view, every like, and every subscription helps us continue bringing these deep historical narratives to life with accuracy, emotion, and detail. We aim to uncover not just events, but the human experiences behind them, the moments of decision, tension, and reflection that shaped history in ways many people never fully see. Tell us in the comments, if you could personally explore a site from tonight's documentary, which location would you choose and why? What draws you most to that moment in history? The people, the events, or the mysteries that still remain unsolved? And if you were given the chance to leave a message carved into stone for a civilization 12,000 years into the future, what would you write? Would it be a warning, a lesson, a hope, or a question for those who come after us to discover? Your thoughts and ideas are an important part of this journey. We read your comments, and they help shape future stories and explorations. So don't hesitate to share your perspective, no matter how simple or profound it may seem. See you in the next exploration.